the approach here is to listen deeply.
We're going to have a deep breath.
There's no winner in this unless everyone.
Breathing deep into
incubating the seeds of a new culture.
us awakening to our dreams, the manifestations of creation for a healthy earth, a thriving.
It's much easier to just unconditionally love
We're in an
everybody.
awakening process.
Evolving, and that really the act is for us to be nature, to act as nature, and that's the
Breathing
super
deep into our heart and acknowledging the gift that we are.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey,
Welcome to Technology of Self by AWAKEN DREAM EARTH. My name is Denise Eve Aurora Lotus Love, or just call me D-Love for short. I've got a lot of different names, and I've been going around the world, like meeting amazing people and discovering super amazing innovations and projects that really help humanity and consciousness arise through our own embodiment. So Technology of Self is about what is this technology of our own bodies. We already have technology within ourselves, and a lot of times it seems we've forgotten how really intelligent we are and how tapped in and tuned in and turned on we can be in our embodiment and in life. So that's what Technology of Self is about. It was what is this technology of our embodiment and how can we embrace it and rise in our consciousness and awareness and awakening, and how can we be better humans with more values that are connected to ourselves and ethics that are connected with the whole world. And that's what Awaken Dream Synergy and Awaken Dream Earth is about, is how do we synergize with our dreams and awaken to a better reality that we imagine, we create, and we ground into earth, into life, and synergize with each other. So over the years, I've been knowing Mark Wagnon here and Don Estes. Oh, it just says live 01 right now. I'm hoping that that was recording the whole time. I am not so sure. Hi, I'm recording right now. Okay,
It's
I'm gonna have to stop you guys.
live 2:13, 2:14. It's
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay, well, I'm okay, keep on going.
Yep.
There's a whole crew back here, so it seems like this is their meeting place. Just keep on going. So what I was going to say is that Don Estes, I have met through some of my cohorts I've met over the years, and he works with Inner Sense Media, or Inner Sense Inc. is his group. Hi, I'm having a podcast right now. Maybe I should go somewhere else because now I think I'm maybe. Anyway. I need to find a place to do podcasts from, because this seems to happen every time. One time there was kids running around me, and last time there was partiers. So now I'm in a place where people are wanting to have a meeting. So I apologize for that. And Dawn, if you can just introduce yourself, let us know what you're about. I'm going to bow out and see if I need to move. Mark, if you could just keep on helping make this happen. I'll just be listening and seeing what I need to do, if I need to move my computer or something like that. So thank you, Dawn. Please tell us more about what you do, and love what you do. Thank you. Technology Self, Technology Earth. How do we support ourselves and our growth and be in harmony with all of life in a beautiful way? And let me check in with these people.
Okay, so I am the president of a company called InnerSense Incorporated, which was incorporated in 1984 with a mission to design and develop and distribute technology based on a paper that I wrote in the late 80s and early 90s called Sensory Resonance, which is a state of mind that a person enters into when all of the sensory mechanisms are synchronized together into a one coherent experience. So what does she want me to talk about, Mark?
Well, I think we could go into a little more of the history that led up to your latest work, right? How did you get to be doing what you're doing now?
Well, as I mentioned, I actually began a long time ago.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, I had written this paper on sensory resonance. And you probably, most of your listeners are probably aware that, or probably heard that back in the 60s, we were doing a lot of experimentation on our brain chemistry.
Yes.
And I loved it. It was back in the mid 60s. It was before they made everything illegal. And I was a chemistry major. So we were just fooling around in the chemistry laboratory and playing with these things that in those days were called psychedelics. And I actually loved it. I wanted to live there. I never had a bad trip. I really never saw anybody else have a bad trip until they made it illegal. And everybody started cutting it with strychnine and other dangerous substances. But I really wanted to live there. I'd love to that space, that altered state or that non-ordinary state of mind. And I wanted just to stay there all the time. But I learned the hard way that all of those kinds of chemicals basically have a compensatory lag time. They rob you of some of your own brain chemistry over time. And it became obvious to me that I couldn't just stay there all the time. So at that moment, I dedicated myself to coming up with a way to achieve that kind of altered state without having to pop a pill. And the school that I was going to was kind of open to that, and not so much about doing it, but about learning about why people did it and how it worked. And I learned so much during that time that by the time I got out of college, I was able to start using technology or finding technologies that I could combine together to create a state like that. So now we're like in our 13th generation of technologies. And we've learned how to use the technology to synchronize all of the sensory mechanisms, what a person sees and hears and feels and smells. We actually have about 48 different kind of sensory mechanisms. And but our technology uses those three main ones, the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic, to synchronize a person's reality into one single coherent experience. And when we do that, it basically satisfies the need of the part of the brain that is always looking for security and novelty. If anything doesn't add up and fit the picture, it will concentrate on that or focus on that. Kind of like Captain Kirk in the Starship Enterprise. His main goals was security and novelty. If there was a security risk, the shields went up. If there was a novelty that couldn't be answered, he would make a committee and send a crew down to a planet or wherever to solve the issue. But sensory resonance seems to give the brain what it needs for those two things. So it supplies it with security and no novelty. And when that part of the brain kind of lets go, the mind immediately goes to higher states, feelings of peace and well-being and connectedness, and that you're on the right track and that you can trust in the universe and take faith. And that those kind of feelings are hard to come by these days. And it's been very interesting for me because now I have this new generation coming in and trying to explain to me that there's a psychedelic revolution underway. Again. And I'm like, well, not exactly, because that was like started 60 years ago.
Right.
And we've learned so much since then that we don't really need to do it that way anymore. In fact, what a lot of the people, I've noticed that a lot of people that are into the so-called plant medicines fail to realize that we were once those plants.
Yep.
And the way evolution works is it conserves order. So I'm pretty convinced that it has conserved, or evolution has conserved, the ability to make all those kind of things, no matter who we are.
Exactly.
So I finally came to the conclusion that there's a pharmacy in here,
That's
and
right.
I'm the pharmacist, or you're the pharmacist, and we can write a prescription to feel any way we want to feel.
That's right.
Many people won't do that. Many people will let somebody else or some situation that they're in write the prescription.
Right.
And it seems to be fairly hard for a person to let go of all of that and take really control of their own mind. Even hard for people that understand this, like me. It's hard for me to really just totally let go and be there. But that's why we created this technology, to make it easier.
Yes.
Because a lot of people out there, you have tried meditation and they tried it for 20 minutes or an hour and nothing amazing happened, so they just stopped doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they fail to realize that it used to take 40 years for a person to dedicate themselves to learn how to do this and achieve these kind of states. But of course, we don't have that kind of time anymore. So this technology assists people by greatly shortening the amount of time that it takes to get into a state of mind like that.
That's so beautiful, Don. And it makes perfect sense from the perspective I've been taking on in working in conscious linguistics. The idea that, yes, we're part of the same genetic history and memory with these plants and fungi. We have the memories, we have the endogenous abilities to create these neurotransmitters and hormones and pheromones and all of these other elements. It's within us. As a matter of fact, we're so still connected with plants, even if you are still eating. And the 9 essential amino acids, right, that come from plants that we don't tend to make endogenously, but can. It's just that we've stopped doing it in our relationship with, or legacy relationship with plants. But I'm practicing breatharianism again. I've gone on, haven't eaten since the 8th, and I give up water next month. And continue to go on, eventually seeing what can be manifested even without sleep, because all of the experiences are within consciousness, and it's triggering those the way you're talking about. It's like I've said before on this podcast that all technology is kind of like training wheels for consciousness. It just helps us realign with what we can do. It aligns with what our potential is. And I'd say, hats off to you, Don, because you're way ahead of your time as usual. And working on this type of technology really does assist this conscious evolution. So
Well,
go ahead.
it's very interesting because in any given moment, consciousness can either be experiencing what's happening to it, or it can be analyzing what's happening to it. The only connection that consciousness has to the internal environment or the external environment are the sensory mechanisms.
Yeah.
And like I said, at any given moment, it can only be experiencing what's going on or analyzing what's going on. It's extremely difficult to do both of those at the same time. And what we discovered, been doing all this work, was that if there's just two sides of the equation where you have to experience or analyze, if you go to the experience side, the only thing that can be experienced is pain or pleasure. And since pleasure has over the years become a taboo or gotten the hands down by a lot of folks, the only thing left over on the experience side is pain. So people prefer not to go there. They prefer to stay on the analysis side, especially in the Western worlds that we live in. So we find that most people spend about 95% of their time in the analysis mode. And it's good to be able to analyze, but those same people will wake up when they're 80 years old and they'll wonder where their life went, because the truth is that you don't remember analyzing life. The only thing you remember is sensing it. And so if I were to ask you, what were you doing at 2:30 in the afternoon on September the 27th in 2002 or something like that, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me unless a serious event had happened at that point. So we tend not to remember anything that we analyze, only experiences. So the whole goal of InnerSense and our whole mission statement is basically to help people learn how to experience their life instead of analyze it so much.
Dawn, that's really wonderful. I'm wondering, I'm sorry, I did have to move. They are having like a once a week meeting. So now I know I can't be here on Fridays for the podcast. I will find a place. But Dawn, I didn't hear all of the introduction, and I'm wondering if you talked about perception and the many different kinds of inner senses, and also in regards to what you're speaking about right now. It's a big, a lot of people are talking about flow. So this experiential space, like being in Tulum, it's one of the reasons why I love it here. It's about experiencing, but it's also about speaking about what it is, communicating it. So in a way, we're learning how to communicate a new kind of experiential way or a flow in life that works with many of the senses that are beautiful, that feel good, that have meaning to our heart and our soul. Whereas in the past, we're used to, war and competition and you against me. And now we're like a global people coming together, realizing that this is a cosmic experience, that we are in all this together. And we can choose pleasure over pain, but also in all the senses, in all the networks, in all the ways, not just the libido, not just the mind, not just the heart, but every sense, every connection aligned and in a good aligned and balanced kind of way. So I'd love to hear what you have to say about a few of those kind of ideas and where you've been at with that.
Sure. Well, perception can only really be done or received in two ways. You can either perceive things as a threat or perceive them as a challenge. And if you can let me share my screen for a second, I can show you more of what I'm talking about. Do I have to say share on my end?
We got you. You are shared right now. You're
Okay.
you
Great.
see a human atomic nervous system expanded
Yeah.
model.
Yeah. So let me step back here. So here you basically see the standard established way that that everybody sees brain waves. And you can see all the different brainwave states down here, starting at subdelta, going all the way through ultra beta, which they now they call this gamma up here on this end, and down here they call this, I believe, epsilon. So people are starting to realize that the brainwaves go beyond these 4 or 5 normal ones from delta, theta, alpha, and beta that most people talk about. And down below that, you can see the frequency ranges associated with those different states of mind and kind of a little one-word description of what happens at those different states. But what we discovered was that homeostasis will pull you back into the middle if you try to go either way, sympathetic or parasympathetic. If you try to go either way very far, homeostasis will pull you back into the center. But what we discovered was that is a matter of perception. So when you start speeding up into a sympathetic nervous system response, you either take that and perceive that as a challenge or a threat. And most people or most scientists only see this sympathetic nervous system response as what they call fight or flight. but it's really greater than that. If I go to this slide, you can see that if a person goes sympathetic, speeds up, the heart rate speeds up, blood pressure goes higher, and you have to make a decision whether this is a threat or a challenge. If you decide that it's a threat, then you go into what we call sympathetic dissonance, which is what they call the fight or flight syndrome. And they mostly only talk about this with regards to the sympathetic nervous system response. But that's not the only thing that happens in the sympathetic nervous system, because if it's seen as a challenge, you go into what we call sympathetic resonance, which is these feelings of profound exhilaration and inspiration and joy and peace and all of those things that we see as resonant as opposed to dissonant. The same thing happens on the other end when you try to slow down. If you say that I'm slowing down because I need a rest, I need to recharge or whatever, that's seeing it as a threat, and you go to sleep into what we call parasympathetic dissonance. But if that goes too far, if you stay over there all the time, it becomes very hedonistic and even leads to some types of criminal behavior, like a person that can't get excited enough about their life, so they have to do something big and huge to get their rocks off, basically. So they will they'll move into some kind of criminal behavior if they stay in this parasympathetic dissonance zone too long. However, if you, as you're slowing down, if you say, no, I want to stick with this, and you don't go to sleep, and you just go into these deeper and deeper parasympathetic states, that's seeing it as a challenge, and that moves you into what we call parasympathetic resonance as opposed to dissonance. And this is what's called the relaxation response, where you get this profound relaxation without having to go to sleep. And it leads ultimately to like self-realization. So over here you get self-mastery, and over here you get self-realization. But the only way to really get there is to go both ways at the same time, because as I mentioned, if you start out sympathetic and go so far, homeostasis will pull you back to center. The only way to get up here to these profound states is to go both ways at the same time. So this is why you have to, or a person has to learn how to inspire themselves and get themselves really stimulated and worked up, but at the same time be experiencing these feelings of profound relaxation. And this leads to what we call an expanded state, because most of the technologies and methods out there help lead a person to what we would call a focus state. So it's an alpha state or a delta state or a theta state or a gamma state. But our technology basically expands the brain waves to where you might have energy going on in all of these different octaves at the same time. And they might even be harmonic with each other. So you might have like a 2, a 4, an 8, a 16, a 32, and a 64 band in your brain waves, such that the brain moves into this expanded state instead of a focused state. So that's basically how we see the whole idea about perception. It is about whether what you perceive is taken in as a challenge or as a threat.
Amazing. That's where a lot of the movements, like finding your purpose, your passion, also in, when people they've been doing statistically, when people are end up being criminals, it's because they don't have a purpose. They don't believe in life. They don't have a reason that matters. So it's actually been known. And so like helping people find their purpose, something that will help Earth, that will help each other. And then that perception is like, oh, I'm actually doing something, and that's so fulfilling. I would say. So a lot of people feel empty. So then they go to the dark side, because that's pretty easy to find in the media and around the people and a lot of cultures.
Right.
But so we're working on how do we create like this actual thriving life kind of side. Mark, did you want to
Yeah.
say some things?
No, just brilliant, Don. I have seen this slide before, but it looks a little different. But it's absolutely brilliant. Probably because I'm paying closer attention and also seeing things that I have learned since the last time I saw this. Something you said that was really aligned also was when you talked about the fear aspect or the threat aspect that's experienced, and we'll put the pain on that side also. They're usually connected. If the pain came first, then you fear that, and if the fear comes first and you pulled in the pain, they're always somewhat connected. But that is also a contraction, right? It's like the flow or the perception of consciousness is contracted in fear or in pain,
Right.
pulling away from, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in pleasure, it's expansive, it's open. And what I've noticed in therapies, in even today's even psychedelic therapies, where you can review something traumatic or painful and get to what your state was prior to the trauma or incident, and the trauma can dissipate or erase or be released. Whereas when you try to do that with pleasure, nothing happens, but you re-experience pleasure. So it's like all of the pain and suffering is finite and can be dissolved or relieved, whereas the pleasure side is infinite and is waiting for it to be uncovered.
Yeah. The dissonance, when you see things as a threat, it goes, like you said, into these feelings of fear and anxiety and worry and pain and all those things. But if you stay there, that eventually winds up leading to this anhedonism, which I believe is the first step of every disease that a human being could have. Starts with anhedonism, or I guess a better way of defining that would be the inability to experience pleasure.
Right. It's
So
all covered
people,
up.
yeah. So when people stop hanging out with friends, they stop doing things that give them pleasure, and that sort of thing, it leads to this what we call anhedonism, and it eventually winds up with sickness and death and things like that. So we actually have a little test that we do when we have clients come in. We use a little tingler. Have you ever seen one of those things that has like a little copper arms on it, and you put it on their head and slide it down over their head, and it gives them goosebumps? You ever seen one of those?
No, I have not. No, but
So it's called a tingler, and what we've learned is that if you put that on someone who has anhedonism, they immediately ask you to take it off, and they don't like it. Whereas the average person, excuse me, the average person will not only love it, but they'll ask for more because it causes them to have goosebump, like, God bump kind of experiences. So they love it. So now we know, we have a way of identifying when a person stays here most of the time or here most of the time, because it does lead to this inability to experience pleasure.
Yeah, understood.
Wow,
Yep.
that's so interesting.
Yeah, we ran into the same thing studying the vagus nerve responses, and how fluid or how much information flows along the vagus nerve when somebody is in that dissonant state, or I call it disconnected state, where they're it's like their networks have broken down within their system,
Right.
and and that's also where cancers come in and all kinds of diseases come in.
Yeah.
And when the internal network is functioning fine, you get all the way up to Kundalini, right? You get all of this alignment. So it all kind of is coming together, isn't it? Where we're all of these different insights over the decades are finally all kind of coming together in this, especially this year, it seems.
Yeah, you're just really describing this chart that's on the screen right now. Is the vagus nerve controls the parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah.
And whenever that gets out of harmony, then they move into this parasympathetic dissonance state, which does have all those experiences of being bored or understimulated and that sort of thing. And that itself leads to anhedonism, which is, again, the inability to experience pleasure. And when you do that, when you go there, it's like telling the brain and the mind that you don't want to be here anymore. And so it starts disassembling itself. It's a built-in mechanism into the system that when the operator is not happy about what's going on, the machine itself will start disassembling. And unless somebody steps in and stops that and reverses that, it will lead to illness or death.
Well, what's interesting all about that is they're noticing longevity and the way our cells work. Our cells actually forget how to function. They don't remember how to be brilliant and thriving. They start losing awareness. And so that's one of the things in that. And also just what's happened over the history of our planet, our recent history, is we're just used to looking at the past rather than creating the future. And we're used to looking at the pain, analyzing it, picking it apart so that we can like feel safe or find that space. But now we're creating something new as the helicopter goes by right here. I'm on the beach, by the way. It used to be that I was afraid of helicopters. Like, oh my God, what's that mean? But now I'm just like, okay, I'm in life. It's a beautiful space. So how we can stop that through our languaging systems. Like I work in technology, and I'm very resonant with Mark Wagnon here, and also Dawn's work with languaging and how to work with our words and our feelings and our senses. So, for instance, like you're talking about, seeing a challenge versus a threat. And in, for instance, technology, you always talk about the issues or the problems. And really, that's also what you do in old psychology and how you come out when you're analyzing a space, how you work on changing it. So it's kind of like reprogramming a system, whether it's technology or a culture or a home. You look at the problems, a lot of people mention the problems. Everyone feels bad about the problems. It feels like a threat. Their egos like, I didn't leave the dishes on the counter. You did. No, I didn't. Then start people like denying it, lying, and the integrity is lost because you're only looking at the problems. And then the problems are such a problem that it's really heavy. It's dark. It's uncomfortable. No one wants to take responsibility. But when you look at it as a challenge and that we are responsible for our experience and we're responsible for choice and who we relate with and how we upgrade our own systems, perceive things, and we're looking for the solutions. Like coaching itself is solutions oriented, and whereas psychology is like problems oriented. And then in technology, it's always looking at the issues so that you can solve the problem. And really, what if we looked at technology more of like, how do we look at the solution and then build the solution? So I'd love to hear what both of you have to say of that, especially Dawn, you had your portico. And the portico was looking at how real and authentic we are with our words and our feeling and our senses. And it listened to that through our voice. And now there's been some apps that have been made through your technology. And then I know Mark wanted to move it on to some other stuff. So I'd love to hear about that. And then Mark, go ahead and ask your questions in regards to what we were speaking about earlier.
So you were asking me to talk about the portico?
Yeah, and like how we use our language and how we use our feeling and senses to create our reality.
Yeah. Well, the protocol came from an accidental discovery, as most things do, where we were studying the equation that defines a wave, like a sound wave or a light wave. And that equation says that the complex wave equals the real times the cosine times the frequency plus the imaginaries times the sine waves times the frequency. And I found that really fascinating. If you could still see my screen here, here is the equation right here. And you can go online and you can do a search for sine wave or cosine wave, and you get millions of hits because these are mathematical terms that are used in a lot of mathematics. And most of you will probably remember those names, at least, or those words from high school when they tried to teach us a little bit about this in trigonometry. But if you go online and you do a search for these real and imaginary components here, you don't get anything. And that made me very curious and even suspicious. As, this has been around for a long, long time, and this is the accepted, established equation that defines a wave. And so I was stunned that nobody could tell us what these real and imaginary coefficients are. And the best we could get out of anybody, whether it was be a mathematician or a physicist or a musician or a frequency expert or anything like that, the best we could get was that these are mathematical functions that are required to solve this equation. But we were like, but wait a minute, what are they? Where do they come from? Where do you get the numbers from? Well, those are just mathematical functions that are required to solve this equation. And that really made me suspicious because, as I mentioned, this equation has been around for a long, long time. And I was just stunned that nobody had ever asked that question. What are these real and imaginary components? And since no one could tell us, we went into a really serious research project to find out what these were. And it doesn't really take a genius to really figure this out, because if you read what they say about these in the literature, the physicists know about these real numbers and imaginary numbers. And they refer to this real component as the time component, and the imaginary they refer to as the spectral component. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out what they're really talking about there is that this one, that is the potential of what's going on, is actually talking about the instrument as opposed to this real component, which is the actual component, which has to be experienced over time. So I could have a violin laying against the wall over here that's not making any noise, but it represents pure potential. It could make any melody, but it's just silent until somebody picks it up and starts acting with it over time and adds this part into it. So that signal that's coming down the wire going from your stereo to your speaker, that signal is a complex frequency, and it has things that are coming from the instrument as well as things that are coming from the player of the instrument. And I was stunned that nobody had ever mentioned or talked about that before. But it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I suddenly realized that it applies to everything, any living thing, particularly like right now, you're hearing me talk and there's a signal coming out of my mouth and going through the wires and coming to your speaker so you hear it. But that component is part of what you're hearing is coming from my instrument, from my vocal cords and my resonant cavities. But part of what you're hearing is coming from how I'm thinking and feeling about what I'm talking about. So I could leave that part out and keep on talking, but I'd sound like one of those guys in Battlestar Galactica who's really a computer and has no inflection in the voice. Or I can make my voice really passionate, but that's really coming from how I'm thinking and feeling about what I'm talking about. So to study all these things, to study vibration and sensory science and all that, you have to be able to separate those two components and deal with them separately. So a lot of our technology does that. We have audio technology that can take a song and separate it into these real and imaginary components and feed one into one ear and the other into the other ear, and force the brain into resolving all the differences between those two phases of frequency. And it actually creates more or less what would be called infinite phase. So it can turn like a recording into a live performance. So the only difference between a song that is played live in a venue and that same song that's recorded in a multi-track studio, the only difference is that in the studio version, there's no environment. So somebody has to sit down, a sound engineer has to sit down and take all those tracks and use different little tricks that they have, like panning to different speakers or reverb or echo, or they have different methods of artificially creating that environment, but it's really not the same as the environment. So even at a venue like the Disney Hall, where it's supposed to be made to have this perfect sound environment, even in that place, there's a sweet spot in the very middle that person sitting in the very middle of that thing is getting vibrations bouncing off of all the walls and the ceilings and the floor and the people that are in the room. They're getting that equally into each ear, so it all sounds balanced. But each one of the seats in there is getting a different phase experience because of the way all of that's bouncing off of everything. So our technology basically resolves all that by creating infinite phase. So it's like being in the perfect listening environment where there's no such thing as a sweet spot. You can walk anywhere in the room and it sounds the same. And likewise, we can do that with a human voice. So we have a person speak into it. It separates their player from their instrument, feeds one into one ear and the other into the opposite ear, and forces the brain into resolving the difference between their player self and their instrument self. And you can look around in nature and you can see examples of what happens when the personal aspects of something are better integrated with the impersonal aspects, the outcome is better. So that's not only true of like an instrument and a musician, but it's also true of a driver and a vehicle, or an operator and a machine. Whenever the personal and the impersonal are better integrated, the outcome is better. So that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, this is what's wrong with the world. This is what's wrong with the way that we think about things and how we treat ourselves, is because we're only treating part of ourselves. Another good example of this is that the scientific community, for some really weird reason, sees the sine waves and the cosine waves as the same thing. And our argument starts with just the simple fact is, why do they have different names if they're the same thing? But they would, if you talk to most of them, they have ways of explaining why they believe that it's the same thing. And I can show you a picture here. This is like a picture of a sine wave and a cosine wave, and they run 90 degrees out of phase with each other. But since they look exactly the same, they both look like sine waves. So pretty much most of the scientists think that they're the same. But they fail to realize that this cosine wave actually starts at 100%. It starts at its full power. And over its life, it slows down and then comes back. Whereas the sine wave starts at 0 and grows until it reaches its peak power and then comes back down to 0. So the fact that this one starts at 100%, this is the real component and this is the imaginary component. But for some reason, they don't see that. So if you get sick and you go to the doctor and they do any kind of metabolic studies on your brain waves or your heartbeats or anything like that, they're only looking at the sine wave. They totally drop out the cosine component and only look at the sine wave. So what that's telling you is that when you go to a doctor and they do all these tests on you, they only wind up treating the instrument. Nobody ever treats the player or tells the player that what it's doing is causing the instrument not to perform properly. So they're really great at fixing the instrument, but they send you home without explaining how you got the instrument so messed up. And so you wind up just messing the instrument up again. So there you're back. So how convenient is that for the medical doctors? It's like a lifetime patient, which, by the way, you know what the word patient means is the actual definition of patient is submissive sufferer. So they know when they call you a patient, they know or they're expecting you to be submissive and do everything that they tell you to do. But again, they're only looking at the instrument and they're not looking at the player. So this is kind of how we see things and how we create our biofeedback technologies and our sound technologies and our light and vibration technologies is we separate these two and we feed them back to a person in such a way that they have to reassemble that. We disassemble it and give it back to them. They have to reassemble it back into a higher state of order. Does that make sense?
Wow, I just had that explained so much more deeply. I've heard, for years you speaking about this, and in different moments, and while we're working on making games and we're working on raising our consciousness, and we're often talking about the witness and the creator, the maker. Who am I? What am I? This really helps, and the prefrontal cortex versus the limbic brain and these different kinds
Right.
of spaces of how we approach life, like the prefrontal cortex being the entrepreneur, the CEO of our own life, our own momentum, our purpose, and then that decides and makes the decisions and just chooses the dream, imagines the reality, and then there's the experiencer of the reality, the one who feels what's happening, and that's the instrument. The instrument makes the tone, the sound. The player decides what it's going to be. It can be resonant or it can be discord. So that's where we're choosing right now as humanity. Just bringing it back to like what's going on is like, what is our intention as the player, and then how does our instrument resonate and harmonize to that within ourselves and then in our creations together. I keep on jumping in, but I really wanted to hear from Mark. And also, Dawn, you had said that you didn't have much time. So if you look at the clock, and I'd love to hear from Mark at the moment and his comments. And Dawn, just let us know if you have to go, and Mark and I can continue communicating about what you were saying. But yes, if you want to share more and you have some more time, we love it too.
Okay, great. Go, Mark. Uh-oh.
There we go. Now I'm on mute. Okay. Wow, done. Excellent. Brilliant. We could have about an 11-hour conversation as part one. There's so many integration points. So many integration points that are just beautiful. And I really particularly love that you put imagination or imaginary aspects in the equation, which is so it's like the lost art of imagination. And it's one of the things that Einstein talked about. It's one of it's many the things. There's a wonderful podcast by Gary Lachman. Gary Lachman has written a book called The Lost Knowledge of Imagination, and how important imagination is because it's less bounded by what we know or what we think we know. And all of Einstein's intuitions and imagination about what was possible is what let him go beyond. He'd often figure out, God, I feel I'm right, but I don't know why I feel I'm right. And then he'd explore that feeling and come up with deep insights. And so I really love that you're pulling that back into the math equation, and especially with the insight on the cosine. Very, very useful. I think it shows up in a health test called a phase angle. And phase angle testing is something that is used a lot now in discerning how the network within you is working and its relationship with water within you. And it's just amazing how you can see somebody's health. If they've got a very low phase angle, they're on the border of cancer and death. But if they have a very high phase angle, they're immune to just about anything.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see this more and more filter into the different sectors of society. Again, you're just brilliance. And I would love to go deeper with you on how this can work to help people have this kind of biofeedback system, like Mohan is also working on, where we can go through certain parts of our day and notice how do we move our phase angle, or how do we move into that upper part of your chart where we're doing both at the same time. Is there feedback that we could get energetically that shows, yes, when we do it this way, oh my gosh, look, boom.
Yeah. Well, you're hitting right on it, because the first thing that has to be resolved in this whole industry that we're in is that everybody is really hung up about this idea about frequency. Frequency this, frequency that. That's all you hear people talk about, when frequency is really just a minor component in the whole signal analysis thing. The frequency is only the carrier wave that's carrying the information. It's not the information. So for two things to communicate with each other, they have to be on the same frequency so that the information can transfer from one to the other. But that's not the information. The information is on the phase, and the emotion is on the amplitude. So to get a full picture of a person's vibratory signature, you have to have those three things. You have to have the frequency, you have to have the phase, and the amplitude. And you can see from this chart here that all of this revolves around something that we call the manifestation cycle that deals with real and imaginary. So in this diagram that you see right here, the horizontal plane is the real plane, and the vertical plane is the imaginary plane. And it's an interesting thing because thought starts right here at 0 degrees, and it's purely imaginary. You can think whatever you want, and it doesn't really cause a lot of external problems, maybe a little bit inside, but not a lot of external problems because of the way that you think. But when you express it, when you take a thought and you start expressing it, you bring it back into this real plane, and it makes it real. And so it's hard to find someone who is operational on all 4 quadrants of phase. So there's thinking about it, then there's expressing it, and then you act on this expression, and then it manifests itself. But people get hung up in these different quadrants. Like, I know people that have these incredible minds. They have this ability to think that is like beyond anything that I'm capable of, but they can't really put it into words and express it. Or you'll find people stuck over here in this zone, which I think most people I find are stuck in this zone, to where they can't really get the model drawn out in their mind, or they can't really express it correctly enough to be able to take action on it. But then there's those that do that. They will actually skip the expression mode. They'll think about something and then jump right into action without having expressed it properly. And the whole project fails and dies, and then they're back to thinking again. So it's really hard to find somebody who is 25% and 25% and 25% and 25%. That would make the perfect employee that you wouldn't have to micromanage. You could give them an idea, tell them what you want. They can make a model of it and express it. They can take action on it and manifest it. So it's all about mostly phase and not frequency, about helping a person learn how to manifest what they want.
This is
And it even gets even deeper than that, because this is just the natural flow of nature, how things actually happen. And so you have a thought, that you make it real, and then you nurture it until you get it perfected, and then the second law of thermodynamics takes a hold of everything and starts disassembling. And by the time you find yourself over here, you're standing there with everything that you've created taken apart and laying at your feet. So if you decide to do nothing, then the universe will just take back over and it'll just run that program again. So you'll be back up here again, creating something new, making it real, nurturing it, and watching it fall apart. So do you do that, or do you turn around and go this way? This is the opposite, counterclockwise way of the manifestation cycle, to where when you find yourself here with all those parts laying around you, do you just let the universe take back over, or do you take control yourself and you start gathering all those parts back up and you get them ready to put them back together again in some different form, and you structure them back together, and now you've got something new. So you're back over here to the positive real again, and actually creating something new instead of just letting the universe take back over. Now, it's an interesting thing, because this conversation started with what you were talking about, Denise, about flow. And I have this conversation with people all the time, particularly New Agers, that tell me, well, I just go with the flow. I'm just going with the flow. And they don't take any action themselves. They just go with the flow. But that's like going to here and finding yourself with everything falling apart, and then just going with the flow and letting the universe take back over things. And I've got news for everybody. When you let the universe take back over things, when you let the angels take back over things, they give you what you need, not what you want. And so that's right. They will lead you right back up here, and you got to start all over again, creating something new and all of that. Whereas if you take control right here, when you find yourself standing there with all these parts that's been disassembled, and you decide, well, no, that was a great idea, I just had them together wrong, and you start it back the other way, and you gather all those parts back up and you assemble them back together and make something different out of them, you wind up back over here getting what you want. And so I don't take issue with either way, because there are some things to be said about letting the universe take back control and giving you what you need. But I believe that we've sort of shown that you can have both of those things. If you're gathering this automata together and putting them back into something different, and you're doing that from a spiritual standpoint and trying to keep in mind what you really do need, what you wind up with here is sort of a co-creation. So it's not the universe telling you what to do, and it's not you totally taking control. It's a co-creation. So we really believe that people co-create their own reality, not create their own reality. They co-create it, because there's this other side that's working on things in your life as well.
Well, this overlays so many beautiful things, again, done with integral theory, as well as human design, as well as so many of these, where it's better to co-create, because you may not have all four phases readily available.
Right.
But there are teams that can work together very synergistically. We used to call them Renaissance teams.
Yeah.
When we'd put together a Renaissance team so that everyone could do a role that worked synergistically with the others.
Yeah.
Like a programmer, an engineer, and an artist, right?
Yeah.
Put those three together and you'll get something beautiful that comes out. But I really think this is very, very insightful. And if we could arrange another call, because I would love to do this in some of the more conscious-oriented artificial general intelligence work that's happening, I have some wonderful friends that are looking into that aspect of artificial general intelligence to help utilize this, again, to help wake up humans, not try to manifest consciousness. And I'm very keen to work in that area just from an ethics standpoint. We have enough exponential tech that is contributing to pressure. This stuff leads to synergy, it leads to healing, it leads to awakening our collective consciousness, especially when you look at those aspects of flow. And so many on the tech side use the word balance and instead of dynamic equilibrium. And I think nature has a penchant for dynamic equilibrium, not a static policy of balance. And you've already expressed that, where it goes back and forth, that homeostasis you talked about. Yeah, it's trying to keep it balanced, but look at our economy, how it's not very balanced at all. And so we're evolving into more natural systems. That's the first reason why I went into cybernetics in the first place, was to design things like living systems that work with living systems, not try to control living systems.
Well, balance itself is a weird thing because, most people that think of balance think of something being in the middle between two extremes. But nothing's really like that. It flows both ways. Like a good example of that is the current political situation that we're in, with the liberals on one end and the conservatives on the other end. And they're like so far apart on opposite ends of the scale. And then you have these people that these moderates, they call them, that try to get in the middle of that. But you could never appease either one of those ends because they're so separated from each other. So the only safe place to be is at a third position, almost like a triangular position from the two extremes, to where I'm out here now and I see one extreme over there and I see the other extreme over there. But I want to take a differential approach to that. So in certain situations, I want to be more this one, or in certain situations, I want to be more that one. So like an example would be, what's a good example? My teenage daughter's life. Okay, when it comes to their education, I want to be 80% liberal and 20% conservative. But when it comes to their sexual life, I'm going to want to be 80% conservative and 20% liberal. I want to be able to differentially choose between these two extremes rather than being balanced in the middle. I want to be able to choose on any given situation which side I want to lean toward. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. Well, that's why Bucky added a fourth point to a triangle, right?
Yeah.
He said, the triangle's very unstable. It's not a stable geometric shape. But when you make a tetrahedron out of it, I've always wondered why all of our organizations, both corporate and political, are based on triangles.
Yeah.
None of them are multidimensional. There's another wonderful thing Bucky said about our election system or our political parties. He said, I'm not voting in an election that only has really two choices, unless they say this guy, or none of the above. And if none of the above wins the election, you throw the two bums out and get two more in, until we come up with something that's not a compromise. It is an evolutionary step or a synergistic step.
Yeah.
And I think I look at the gene keys, and gene key 14 has the shadow is compromise. That is the lowest frequency approach.
Right.
And we see that a lot in our current status. Is where does compromise lead? It leads to the lowest common denominator. instead of the highest form of that gene key, number 14, is known as bounteousness. And we're looking at trying to create, thrivability instead of just surviving.
Right.
And that comes when we move into these other dimensions. And your work just sings of multiple dimensions. I mean, you've been downloading stuff from other dimensions for a very long time, Don. And I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think it started when I was about 6. And it kind of peaked, believe it or not, it kind of peaked when I was about 9. I was raised as like a very strict Southern Baptist, almost like primitive Southern Baptist. And there's a lot of rules and regulations. And I could tell there was something that they were talking about, this God and this oneness. I could tell that something about that was true, but for the most part, it seemed a lot of it seemed made up or just opinions and stuff. So one night I got the courage to say to my mom that I didn't believe that all of the whole truth of the universe was in that book. And of course, she freaked out and told my dad, and they tried to convince me otherwise, but I had thought it out really well and they couldn't convince me. So a couple of nights later, lo and behold, the preacher got invited to dinner. And we're sitting there at the dinner table, and he looks at me and he says, son, your parents tell me that you don't believe in the Bible. And I said, well, I didn't say that. I just said that I don't believe that all of the truth of the whole universe is in there. And he said, well, son, we as Christians, we believe that everything a human being needs to know is in that book. And I started to argue with him because I was pretty much loaded for bear, but the spirit took over me at that moment. It felt like warm molasses kind of flowing down to my feet. And it just basically took over me, and it got me animated up on my elbows, up on the table, looking him directly in the eyes. And I asked him, I said, preacher, let me ask you, do you ever talk to God? And he said, sure, I do, son, all day long. And I said, or God said, I don't think it was me, but God said back to him, does he ever talk back to you? And he thought for a second. He said, yeah, I guess you could say he talks back to me. And I said back to him, well, if you can talk to him directly, why do you want to go read something that he said to somebody else thousands of years ago? And it blew his mind so bad that he was speechless. And he couldn't even answer the question. He just reached over and whispered something to my mom, and they just dropped it. And I remember like it was yesterday. I remember sitting there thinking, by God, I got him. And I dedicated my life to becoming the world's greatest debunker of spiritual bullshit. And I went around over the next 30 years. I went around and I joined every group out there, every Protestant, all the Christian denominations, the Judaism, Islam. And in those days, we had, the Moonies and the Hare Krishnas and the Mormons, and I would seek them all out, and I would feign interest in what they were doing until I could get enough of the story to see where the glitch was, and then I'd write a little paper about it and move on. And that continued until I became a real hardcore scientist, and that led me right back to God again. So when people ask me now, what's your faith? I say, I'm a scientist. And they'll go, oh, well, you must be an atheist. And I'm like, no, I actually found God through science. So that's
Perfect.
sort of my whole story in a nutshell.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
Amazing. I just want to talk a little bit like what you guys just about flow, speak about the, working together and stuff like that. So as I come up with this creation as a podcast and stuff like that, and you guys know my history with making Awaken Dream Synergy on Zoom and traveling and things like that. So, just the fact that I had to move a couple times, thank goodness Mark was there with you conversing, Dawn. So there we are together working on this. And I love Mark's Renaissance group. That's such a great story, Dawn. so many great stories, like so much to go over and talk about. And so we're going to continue the conversation. We're going to continue bringing Mark on, bringing you on, Dawn, talking about vibration, unconditional love, frequency, cosine, sine waves, imaginary, real, water, essence, and the spirit of all of this, the spirit of the technology of embodiment, the spirit of water, the spirit of sound, the spirit of creation, and where do we come in as activators and agents of our own creation in this dream of life, and how do we awaken to it, and how do we become lucid dreamers and decide how we're going to manifest, work in that cycle. So yes, definitely together, like with human design, for instance, I've got every single one of my areas defined except for my G center, my heart. So one of my good friends has their G center, their heart, and their voice connected, and nothing else. So we're a good dynamic group of couple or people, friends, putting things together. And that's one of the persons, actually Luis Me, who helped make Awaken Dream Synergy what it was, by bringing all these people in, by being really excited about it, and keeping the generation of the energy. Whereas I would fluctuate, in my waves and stuff like that.
Well,
Love.
that provides all of the different requirements for transformation, because that again is a 4-part quadrant situation to where you have to have active pursuit. That's your part, to actively pursue your own transformation. But then you got to have the right tools. You got to have the map and the fuel and the directions on how to get there. That's what we believe that we're providing, are those kinds of tools. Then you have to have dedicated support on top of that. So what I've learned about the whole thing about support is that it actually works as like a sounding board. It's not so much that somebody's there to give you advice, to hear you and give you advice. It's more so that you cannot, when you're thinking about something on your own, you won't come up with ideas as well as you can when you're trying to explain it to somebody else. And so by having that dedicated support there, as nothing more than a sounding board to hear yourself talk, where you can come up with these ideas that wouldn't have happened if you didn't have the dedicated support. So that's basically how I see what you're talking about there,
Exactly.
about how the flow happens between all of those different components of active pursuit, finding the right tools, having the right dedicated support, and then being willing to let go and move into the new state. So this picture that you're seeing now is a picture of my new space in Santa Monica, California, called the Reality Management Center. And you can see on the wall there, one of our new technologies is basically a digital Cymoscope. So I'm sure you're all familiar with cymatics and cymoscopes. And but one of the problems with cymatics has always been that no one's been able to make the little cup that holds the water or the fluid perfect enough so that you get the same pattern with each separate frequency that you put through there. But so that's why we decided to create this digital cymoscope that where we have control over these edges, 100% control over these edges and what's going on in the center, so we can repeat a pattern. So now we can use cymatics as research to really start seeing what happens with people in different situations and what happens to the wave structure of their voice or their brain or their heart or whatever signal we put through there. So in this space, we have 4 different treatment rooms where we have our wave tables and our massage tables and our reclining chairs. We have a new voice analysis system that lets us get a real accurate view of a person's true vibrational signature, because we actually made the discovery of how to find the true fundamental frequency. Everybody else is basically just taking a signal and averaging a time signal where they get the average frequency. They don't get the fundamental frequency. So again, they're looking at what's wrong. They're not looking at what's right. But we have the ability now to find the true fundamental frequency, and then use that. We can plug that into our vibrational laboratory, And we can convert that into a light and a sound and a tactile vibrational program that they can experience their own true vibrational signature, personal signature. So any of you that are in this area around in SoCal, I'd love for you to stop by and check it out. I don't have a slide for it, but there's a new website out about this center. It's called Reality Management, which is the word reality and then MGMT. So short in there, realitymgmt.com. And you can go there and see what's going on at this place or book a session or get more information.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Now, did you say there was water associated with that, Don?
Yeah, in two ways. Number one, you probably maybe have seen our wave table, which is a fluid transducer that you lie down on. It turns your body fluid into the speaker. So instead of being like a hard surface, a massage table or a chair or something like that, it's filled with a colloidal mineral suspension that is mostly water. But it uses a low a impedance processor to match the impedance between the human body and what's going on in that mattress, so that instead of feeling like you're laying on something that's vibrating, it feels like the vibration is generating inside of yourself and coming out. And also the second thing is, see if I can find it on one of these things here. It's not that one. Let's see.
So realitymanagement.com. This is the center in Southern California that you can experience wave tables, the digital Cymoscope, and you can feel vibration technology. What else can you experience there, Don?
This is the new thing that I was telling you about called the fundamentalizer that allows us to record the fundamental frequencies that a person expresses talking about a particular thing, like a relationship or a job or some other specific thing. And then we can capture all that in time. And if this was running in real time, you would be seeing it marking each one of my fundamental frequencies on this keyboard. And it actually shows the correlated color to that sound on the keyboard. And then when you hit this button up here, it goes full screen. So you can see that on a wall or a screen, or it can be focused right at the body or anything like that. But this is a pretty elaborate piece of software that not only shows you the frequencies and the magnitudes and the phases, it tells you what note you're closest to. You can change the scale. This could be 432 or 440 or any other scaling that you want. It even actually writes it to manuscript paper. So a musician could sit down and sing a song and record that and have it already written onto manuscript paper for other musicians to follow along what they're talking about. And then once we capture all this, we can freeze it. So we freeze a particular concept that they've been talking about, and then we can copy that over to the tone bank, which is another, see if I have a picture of it in here. Yeah, so this is our sensorium frequency laboratory. So we can copy their vibrational signature into this tone bank down here and then make sessions with it, so it can control lights and sound and vibrotactile vibrations and colors and all of that, and then use that to feed back to a person. But to finish answering Mark's question, let me see if I can find it here. I'm not sure I have it on this computer, but maybe. Yeah, here we go. So I mentioned to you the biofeedback technology that separates real and imaginary and goes to earphones to allow the person to resolve the difference between their player self and their instrument self. But if I take those wires loose from those headphones and I run them to this device and I hook those wires up to two 24-karat gold waveguides that are suspended inside of a reaction chamber, and I ask the water to do the same thing that the person's doing, watch what happens. So that's just sound going into this water, but it's actually, the water doesn't have as much resistance to the change as a human being does, and it begins to cavitate and implode inward on itself. And it goes through this same process that we're asking the person to go through, which is basically acknowledge the need to change, give up the resistance to the change, remove any unwholesomeness that's in the way of making the change and purify itself, and then let go and go to the next highest level, which for water is vapor. For a human being, it would be spirit, but this is a metaphor for what the human being is doing for the water to move to its higher state, which is vapor. So you can see it here cavitating in on itself and going to vapor, and the vapor rises up into this vapor chamber. And if it has enough energy, it rises on up here to the very top, where we actually reconstitute it back into liquid and capture it, and then bottle it with this little device over here, and this device here, and then have a person drink this water, and they are drinking water that they're already 70% of, but it's been through this process, and this process educates the water that's already in their body to resolve those differences themselves. So we call this product Transformant, and it's one of the most amazing technologies we've ever created.
Well, and then you actually drink the water, or
yes.
you use the what's the?
No, you drink. You drink it. Here's the whole system here that shows how it works with the little device where has the gold rods in it, and it's the vapor is ozonated, and it's hooked up to a smart amplifier and smart computer that's hooked up to the internet, so that our supercomputer can control this whole process.
Well, there's so much in that again. Oh my gosh! Now you're into another subject that I love in water research, and you talked about water cavitation. It was a wonderful talk by Mark Leclerc. Are you familiar with? Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh, the amount of energy that can occur in water cavitation is just off the charts, and it gives us an idea of how integral water is in our system.
Yeah.
Well, we had to talk about that.
Everybody's experienced what they call water hammer when you're in an old house and you turn off the faucet and there's no valve in there. So the water just gets immediately shut off. But what happens is that the water that's already passed through keeps going down the pipe. So it makes a cavity behind itself. And when it gets to the point where it can't deal with that anymore, it slaps back and causes that water hammer, that big knock that you get in some of those old houses that don't have valves in the faucets.
That's right.
And they say
right over there.
and they say that is thousands of times more powerful than nuclear energy.
Yes. Yeah, it's uncanny about how the dynamics of water, and not just fourth phase of water, but like you just brought up in water cavitation, the amounts of energy that are involved with water in its different states, and that it wraps itself around the double helix of our DNA.
Yeah.
And you were talking about capturing these energy signatures and how it affects water. Like Masaru Emoto's work. Now imagine that impact on our genetics as a water epigenetic effect on our DNA.
Yeah.
Just the amount of information that, not just the memory of water, but the dynamics of water in all of its different states, and its relationship, because it's not just 70% water, it's if you added up all the molecules, about
Yeah.
99% of them are water.
That's right.
And it's not just H2O, right? It comes in different forms.
Yeah, everybody's water is different. Your water is, the water that's in your
Yeah.
body is totally different than my water.
Exactly, because Dene elder Pat McCabe refers to water as the Akashic record of Earth.
Yeah, exactly.
And
yeah, we pull it into our bodies and then we urinate it back out into the earth, and that's been going on since forever.
right.
And so when we drink in this water, we are drinking water that has passed through the whole system.
That's
And
right.
as they've discovered, water holds the information of the environment that it's in. The only problem with that is that it's so resonant that if you do like Dr. Emoto says, and you have a bottle of water and you hold it in your hands and you put love on that water, and it goes to love, the second that you hand that over to somebody else that's not in love, it goes to their energy field. So it's been impossible to really get the water to hold on to the information unless it's put through a system like this, to where the water itself becomes the agent of its own transformation. Because what most of these structured water companies do, they have the water in a reaction chamber like this, but they have some exogenous source. They have a laser or a coil or a magnet or something that's got the information on it, and then they expose the water to it by getting it in close proximity. But that's totally different than the water itself going through the experience of, as I said, acknowledging the need to change, giving up the resistance, purifying itself, and letting go and move into the next level. The water becomes experienced rather than taught. So it's like the difference between having kids in a room and a teacher teaching them, and the windows are wide open, and the kids are looking out at the other kids playing out there, and they're not paying much attention to what the teacher's saying. Whereas in this situation, it's the person or the water itself becoming the agent of its own transformation and going through the experience instead of being taught about the experience.
Beautiful.
And where every body is a kind of reader and then a re-experiencer of what's happening. And also, as humanity, we have a way of shifting the experience into a new dream reality. What I've always said, one of the challenges of humanity is that we put our creation, like our excrement, into clean water, and then we put chemicals into it to change its state into back to clean water, rather than allowing the trees to read what was going on with us. Because when our digestive system does something with the food, does something with the water, and then our product is our excrement, and that we're not letting the earth read it, we're not letting the trees that will then make us the fruit and the vegetables and the flowers, then they're not going to know what kind of elements we're actually needing or missing. It's this ecosystem of exchanging information, like the water holds all kinds of information. So the ocean is having to read it, and the ocean is trying to figure out how to deal with all this, chemically, chemical water. And it doesn't have that ecosystem of how to work with it. It's better it goes into the ground and it gets reabsorbed by amoebas, worms, mycelia, roots, like all these different things that can read and bring it back up into the light. So, oops.
Yeah. So these images here are basically graphs from people's voices as they're run through this through the portico. And you can see it makes kind of a mandala looking effect when I start plotting all these real and imaginary components from their voice directly on here. And you can see it's some amazing things happening. And here you see like a body, you can see 2 arms and a leg and a head. Here you can see a whole face that showed up in this person's. Here again, 2 arms and 2 legs. You can see this is someone who is mostly focused on the imaginary potential, whereas this one is mostly focused on the real component. And you can see them where they have them combined together. So if you were to do this on a person that had never done any work on themselves, the pixels just randomly distribute. But when a person's done some work on themselves, you can see the geometry of what they're saying show up here. And this is why we call it a quantum biofeedback, because you're actually seeing the geometry that makes up the sounds that you're making. So that geometry came prior to you making it real by speaking it into this time domain that we live in. So being able to see the geometry that exists on the other side at the same time while you're speaking is pretty amazing.
Which
and
brings,
yeah,
if
go
you
ahead.
just for like people that might not know Dr. Emoto's work, like he basically showed that water, when quickly frozen, you can see the crystalline shape of the water. So if it's when it's in symmetry, it's usually love, life, health, thriving, and good space. But when it's dissonant and you don't see the fractal symmetrical patterns, it's more like a corrupt, dirty, angry, all this kind of thing. So that's the same thing in the portical, but this is digital cymatics, or digital ability to see what your voice and your feeling and your intention is actually doing. So this is the symmetric cymatic mandala that you make of your feeling and your existence and how you are. Yeah.
So imagine this. Imagine if I take this program now, and instead of letting a person speak into it and showing them these images, what if I go to my plant over in Longmont, Colorado, where we have a greenhouse built, and we have a bottling an extraction plant and a bottling plant for CBD there. And imagine if I go into my greenhouse, and in each of the four corners, I put a copper rod, and I hook that up to the portico, and I'll let the portico, I'll let the plants themselves decide what water they want, what light they want, what temperature they want, based on their own biofeedback. And so we've started doing that. We're having a tremendous success with it. You can even hook a person up with a brain monitor like this. And this little strip here goes around your head and controls the portico. So we can actually have a grower put this on and decide or program a particular strain of CBD to have a specific effect. So the technology is just getting outrageous of what we can really do with it now by separating these real and imaginary components.
Okay, and now we got another subject.
I was going to ask about that earlier. When you talk about CBDs and CBGs, right, Mark? It's like it's about aligning your system. We're going back to that. And Don,
we're at a project right now to where one of our partners runs the military's cannabis program, and we had like 40, somewhere between 30 and 40 veterans in our new center night before last, and we started a program with them to using the fundamentalizer that I showed you to actually see which strain of CBD would be best for a person. So there's all kind of things that are going on within this industry right now. So it's hard to even keep up with it all. But as you can see, we're kind of involved in pretty much every aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it's just the most, I think that vibration is probably the most important thing a human being could study, except for maybe their own spiritual evolution.
Yeah, which is assisted by vibration.
Exactly.
In clearing the path, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I totally am down with this. Last time we talked, I might have mentioned that I used the precursor in cannabis, the primary precursor, CBGA, cannabidiolic acid, to treat my mom's Alzheimer's. that was in combination with the microbiome, which is a whole slew of different vibrations that represent the how many billions and billions of different types of bacteria are in your system, how many, billions and billions of different fungi are in your system, and all the other microbes. I think the human is only like 0.00323% human.
Exactly.
And to see what those vibrational qualities are, that leads me to another, two things. First of all, we've got a strain now that is 308 milligrams per gram of CBGA. We have a strain now that has the precursor. The highest percentage I gave my mom was 13%, but it disappeared back in 2013 because everyone was wanting to grow CBD and THC, so they'd burn up all the CBGA. But now we have it, and with the microbiome treatments that are out now, we have remedies for Alzheimer's very easily with just natural elements. You don't need any medications whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I really just so love your work, Don. There's so many subjects I want to talk to you about. I'm on the board of what's called the Institute for Love and Time, which we are doing unconditional love and time travel experiments, where it's non-linear, not unidirectional time, but time is multi-directional and quite variable, from the quantum, no time or no non-local aspects of consciousness also, but also the ultimate causality of unconditional love. And when we start playing with these things, we have so many ways of doing mass healing and raising collective consciousness. And what I've done with this technology is kind of backfill my early years with insights that I have, not just from today, but the downloads that I have from other dimensions, and then just feed it to my younger self, is why I got so many insights as a very, very young person, as yourself, starting out 3 and 9 and all of these young ages where you're just getting these downloads. You're probably giving them to yourself, It's not just unidirectional time. So that's the stuff we're doing over there. And I would love to talk to you more about the different definitions for time and, of course, different dimensions.
Yeah. A lot of people, everybody knows what a time machine is. Everybody's seen all the movies, and everybody knows what a time machine is. But we call the Vibrasound a no time machine instead of a time machine.
That's right. That's right. That's fourth dimensional stuff. Right. Yeah. Just lovely.
Well, guys, I've got to break away here. I've got another appointment in a few minutes.
Same here.
Yeah. And the way this works as well, I only have a certain time limit, and I paid the max. So, Don, thank you so much for being here on Technology of Self through Awaken Dream Earth. Thank you, Mark, for being here. We'll be having more every Friday. We're working on making a podcast. I'll look for a location that I don't have to flow into different directions. And now we have some momentum happening here, and I'm just excited to continue to bring this beautiful community of thinkers, movers, shakers, experiencers of how to bring consciousness alive through our embodiment, through our knowledge as the player and the instrument. And we are the technology of self. So how do we play this beautiful instrument of experience through the sense media of sound, vibration, feeling, thought, vision, all of this, and then the 42 senses that both you, Dawn, and I and Mark, we've all came up together on our own and then merged, and like, oh, you came up with 45 senses, so did I. So like all these senses that are not included in the media, but like in technology and media, we can really work on honing our own personal systems. So I really am grateful for your work.
Dawn, for your work and thoughts, Mark, and for my work. I'm doing, love to share this with the world, and I really believe that there's really heart and soul in this, and being able to really be conscious human beings as the technology, rather than counting on an artificial intelligence beyond us to decide how we're going to be. But it can help us, of course, but always being that we are the intelligence, especially when we link together, and that's where the hearts on the grid of the matrix of Indra's net, of all the net of life, we can share our knowledge, share our information, share our hearts, and together we are potent, powerful, and we can create the reality that we love through our dreams, through our actualizing the dreams, the manifestation. So love to talk more about that manifestation cycle and how to do it. We'll probably bring other people on to discuss this and how to come alive. That's the idea. So
Thanks for
Right.
inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right.
Dawn.
We'll talk soon.
Yeah, take care,
Wonderful.
Don.
Bye.
Bye. And then Mark, if you and I will stay just a few more moments.
Okay.
Thank you, Dawn.
Bye.
Much love. Take care.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
let's connect more.
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Mark. No, we both probably have to get going, and I'm gonna do my best to upload this one today and write it all out so that we have it available, because
Beautiful.
on our private group in Facebook and also on YouTube. So the YouTube channel is Awaken Dream Earth at the moment. This is the Technology of Self podcast under the Awaken Dream Earth network. And Mark Wagnon is a wonderful human being in our life. And so next time, you were saying that you wanted to talk about unconditional love. And can you explain a little bit about what you'd like to talk about next time, Mark?
Well, there's a couple of things I'd love to talk with Don further about. One is what's going on at TILT, the Institute for Love and Time, and the experiments that we're conducting and the new app that's coming out. Especially in doing work that ties in breath and ties in water and ties in the biofeedback systems to help us navigate. So taking a look at Don's stuff to see how closely it might perceive the increase in certain neurotransmitters during an activity, the different hormones and different other chemicals that are released endogenously during certain experiences, or when certain Renaissance teams come together, and how they can just navigate, just looking at their own field, how it gets into that collective flow state that we find is so useful in manifesting.
And what is that Renaissance team, really quickly?
Renaissance teams are basically when you take different elements that are needed in a particular approach to something. And what we did back in the 90s, actually, this goes back to the 80s, actually, where we took a programmer, an engineer, and an artist and set them down together and said, well, I can take what the engineer is trying to communicate, and I can program it using the artist's representation that makes it really accessible to communicate something really complex. For example, weather systems. When you can visualize those in 3D animation, it makes it so much easier to visualize what's going on in the atmosphere at different levels and speeds and colors and so forth. It was very useful. And my friend Robert Alexander, who we had on Awaken Dream Synergy, who did sonification of raw data from the sun, that really helped explore patterns and information that we weren't seeing in the raw data. But when it was put to music, put to sound, it made it crystal clear that, oh, here's what's happening with carbon, because it's these notes that represent carbon. And it just comes out as to how much carbon is changing, form and so on in the sun's raw data. we might be working with Robert at the Institute for Love and Time with a breathing thing, because he's got his product called Breathscape, which allows you to really fine-tune the efficiency of your breathing. And I want to do something with him now, practicing breatharianism, that shows how I'm manifesting the different elements, the different amino acids, the different types of energy within, including water, including different states of water, including rest needed for sleep, including, how the other dimensions affect my well-being, just through breathing, just to taking the infinite potential and breathing it in, as desired by not me necessarily, but by all of the systems within my body. What are they asking for? What would be synergistic to bring into my system right now? And then just breathe that in. It's really exciting.
Very, very exciting. I love breath work. It helps me every day, like working with the breath, like expanding. It feels like light energy, like seeing the light energy come in as
Yeah.
you breathe it. You can just feel the alchemical shift in your body, because it's truly a nutrient that helps all the processes in your body. So
Yes,
this is what we're talking about, technology of self. So
Yep.
we'll decide what next week is. There's a few options. We're going
Okay.
to do another Friday. I'm going to discover another location because
Yep.
they have their meetings, their
Yeah.
professional meetings here every at the time that I want to do it. So again, I'm at La Zebra. Thank you, La Zebra and Tulum. A lot of good stuff happening here.
Good promo.
And
Thank you for plugging. Yep.
yeah. I mean, La Zebra's been great people for me. I'm going to write that in. And so we also have potential to talk about protocol love and
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and
Raymond
yeah.
Powell. I feel his presence.
Yeah, so there's
Yep.
a whole like Awaken Dream Synergy, the network, our network of people.
Yep.
They are wanting to talk about protocol love, like have like a get together. So I'm almost thinking maybe we should just do it live here, or we can do it like on Zoom and kind of private and see what happens. But also in the work that I'm doing right now and looking at writing a decentralized autonomous organization white paper, we're
Yep.
talking about all these geometries and how the geometries work. So we're using the Renaissance group, for instance, and it's really working out. But we're doing communications relations,
Yep.
tech dev, and
Yep.
then design information architect. And it's really working out quite well, because before we had maybe the tech dev, the design, but we didn't necessarily have the communications. And now having the communications just really makes the relations and communications really well done. So I think we'll get
Beautiful.
going because we have a limited time. We are Technology of Self. This is Awaken Dream Earth. I'm D Love. This is Mark Wagnon. And we'll be coming back more often, especially as we discover how to upgrade this experience. But we're so excited to share our friends, our cohorts, and these innovations that can really help bring actual consciousness of humanity within awakening to the dream of life thriving. So if we can just imagine that right now, because this is Awaken Dream Earth, let's have that dream. What does it look like when Earth people are awakened to a dream of thriving within themselves and in their interconnection? Let's just have a moment. Let's imagine that. Let's dream that. Let's awaken to that. And so it is. I definitely want to be able to upload and export this one, because I wasn't able to do another one because it was over 2 hours. So
okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Did you have one more thing to say?
Nope, I'm done.
All right, thank you all. Thank you for those who watch and enjoy this, and we're gonna keep on doing it. Besos, abrazos, apapachos from La Zebra, Tulum, Mexico, which means kisses, hugs, and soul hugs. Unconditional love to all of you and all your creations. Thank you for being alive. Thank you for your soul purpose and coming alive to it.
Beautiful.
And now I'm going to end broadcast.